Welcome to another episode of Bum-ba-ba-ba-ba-ta-BUM. Fire up the ovens with your host, Nomad Magover. So, I'm thinking today about the oil industry, right? The oil industry, right? When you think about the oil industry, you got to think about first things first, the sandy, right? The sandy, right? They have it at the beach, right? And they have it in the Middle East, right? And you look at the deposits of the oil in the Texas, right? And also where the Aztecs, where you could be Aztecs, right? The Texas Receptus, right? It's like the original Bible translation. Well, wherever you're going to find the sandy, you're probably going to be able to extract the oil, because, you know, when you look at the Middle East, right? They sure have a lot of sand, right? And they have a lot of oil, right? But there was a man in Europe, and he names it a German, right? A manager, right? He names it fossil fuel, right? And they run the scam, the Jew, right? Because the German Nazi is just an Ashkenazi, right? He or she cannot see a Jew, right? It's a cover crop, right? So this idiot, he comes up with this idea, right? That if we say it, that the oil comes from the fossilized creature, which can be partially true, because, you know, there's many creatures that died, right, in the dirt, right? So it's not really like a full-on lie, right? So it's one of those true lies, right? Where it's like a little bit true, or like 95%, but it's not fully true, right? Because what they call is different grades of oil, right? What you want it is not the heavy oil, right? Which is, we call it the tar, right? And in California, they have a very famous place called the La Brea tar pits, right? What it is this, you know, the oil that bubbles to the top of the earth, right? It is because the pressure, right, from the and that's why California has a lot of what they call it earthquake, right? Because the pressure from underneath the ground, it pushes the oil to the top of the surface. It's kind of like a pimple, right? With the oil in your body gets pushed to the surface, right? And then it creates like what they call a white head or a black head, right? And that's what happens with the tar, right? The pressure pushes the oil to the top of the surface, right? And depending on the type of the dirt, right, which could be sandy, it could be the soily, the more that the heated dirt, right, becomes like liquefied, right, the better the quality of the oil, right? This is why the Middle East oil is such a hot commodity, right? Because in the international community, they've decided that we don't want to take from the sandy beach, like in the beaches of Florida, or like Long Island, or maybe Hawaii. They don't want to take the sandy from that necessarily, because it eats away at the valuable land that they need it, right? So you look to the places on earth where loading with good quality sand, and you're going to find it naturally in the Middle East, right? So like you can get it in Texas, right, with a pump, right? You do it, you drill it into the ground, and underneath the topstone and deeper and deeper, you find the deposits of the oil, right? And also you can do it in California, but much more risky, because in California there's too much pressure because of the natural environment, right? But in the Texas is not as much pressure, right? And you drill it in the mainland, like in the Midland or the Odessa, right? In the basin. They call it the basin. Why? Because it's like a crater, right? And you're already lower in the ground. So it's making the drilling a lot better and easier to get beneath the surface and get to the oil, which is nothing more than the heated dirt, right? From the magma under the earth, right? But you have to look into, like, the best quality that you could get. It is the blonde dirt. The blonde. It's kind of like, you know, when you hold the sand and you touch it and you feel it, it is nice and dry. It is like the perfect consistency to easily have the purified dirt, right? So what happens is, when you take the dirt from, let's say, the Texas, right, you have to take it to a place called a refinery, right? That is where they take the dirt and they separate the particle. They separate the silver from the dross, right? They take away the thicker type of the dirt, and then they extract the sand in a particle separator, and then they do the melting, and then they're creating the oil, right? This is not really fossil fuel. It's mostly dirt, right? And when you get the oil from the Middle East, right? The nice thing about the oil from the Middle East is you don't need the refinery as much, right? Because it's already the blonde sand, and like endless amounts of the blonde sand, right? So that blonde sand is making what is called the type of oil called the light sweet crude, right? They don't call it fossil fuel. They call it a light sweet crude, right? Because it's not rare over there, right? It is. They don't call it fossil fuel in the Middle East. They call it the light sweet crude, right? Because there is like prevalent and ready to go. It's a beautiful way to build up the country, right? So the global oil trade, right, is very interesting because of different grades of oil, right? And in certain parts of the world, they called it the fossil fuel to artificially drive up the price, right? But the fact of the matter is, oil is very simple to take it out of the ground, but a little bit complicated to refine it, and costing a lot more money. So because of the refining process of the oil, they artificially inflate the price because they want to create the jobs and the labor. But in the Middle East, they do not need all of this extraneous labor and refining, right? So, but the point of this, I get at it, right, is that you don't necessarily need to get the oil from the ground or from the sand, right? Oil is mostly lubrication, right? The gasoline is different, but this is just, to my knowledge, my understanding, is mostly just like a blend of the alcohol plus the oil is kind of like the gasoline, right? Different type of oil altogether, where they're taking a little bit more time to create the formulation, so that when you burn the gasoline, it will burn. It's like watery, right? In other words, the gasoline, it burn it, and in a way that it powers the engine, not for lubrication, but for generating the energy, keeping the engine moving, right? Not necessarily keeping the engine lubricated, right? Different types of oil for different application, right? But keep it in mind that you can create different types of engine to burn different types of fuel, right? So if you wanted to, like the Henry Ford, he had done it in the past, and also like the diesel truck, right? Which is burning like the very dirty oil, right? You can change it. I've done the research. Apparently, you can use regular hemp seed oil in the diesel engine to lubricate the engine, right? So why not do it, right? I don't understand, I cannot comprehend it, why we're not growing the hemp everywhere, running the test, only because, there's too much jobs depending on the dirty way of doing it, right? This is the very interesting thing, the oil industry, right? Why they want to take it from the dirt rather than from the growing of the plant. And I would have to say it that there is agreements in place to keep and help the Middle East to grow up and become sustainable with this thing that they have a lot of it, right? Because it's a very hard time for them to grow a lot of nice crop in the Middle East, right? So the whole globe, they adjusted and create an entire market for the oil to make sure that the Middle East can, grow up like and not be a little baby. And, how do you do that? Well, the answer is you make a deal with the Jew, right? Because the Jew will definitely want to make sure that they control that area. So they'll say, okay, we make a deal with all the country, and we'll make sure that we keep the global oil market related to sand and not to the plant. And that's why they call it, like the refinery, they call it the plant, right? Because it's not actually a plant, but it replaces the plant, right? I mean, this is crazy, right? So, like, therefore, the Jew does the Middle East a favor, and they create their own religion. They say, okay, we're not going to give you the Jesus Christ, we give you the Muhammad, right? The Moham and the Mohammeds, right? And then that's the deal that they give, right? So basically, they torture the people in the Middle East by saying that you must love Moham and Mohammeds, but then they deny them the actual ham, and they deny them the meds, so they play the takeaway, right? This is like, love Moham and Mohammeds, but you cannot have ham and you cannot have meds, right? It's really cool the way they do it, always with the takeaway and the keep away, right? You can have Mohammed, but you can't have Mohammeds or Moham, right? Is in the religion. So it's always like the give and the take and the way, right? But the other thing we give to you as a Muslim is you must keep it, the Old Testament, right? This is the most important thing, right? You must keep the law. You must making sure that they honor their mother and their father, the true God, right? And not yourself, but definitely focus on the parents and become addicted to the parents, and make sure that your world revolving around the parents, and we make sure that we control the parents, and they make you pay rent, or they are your parents, right? Anyway, just thinking about the best type of the energy is from the sun, right? This is the truth, the solar power, right? I mean, truly, with it is unlimited, and because of it, it can completely disrupt the entire oil industry. And common sense would be it that everybody in the world would be revolving around it, the solar power and the wind, right? Focusing on the wind and the solar, because it's like the old school windmill, right? Think about it, the old school windmill, right? I understand the China, the Sia hyena, right? That they would be number one in the wind, because they've got a lot of wind. It's a very windy place. But to just go back to the old America and the old windmills, right? They would using the windmill to power the motor, a basic motor without any electricity, and the wind would have gears, and the gears would turn it one way to the other way, and then it would create a motor, and they would call it the grist, right? The G-R-I-S-T, which is kind of like the Christ, right? But C-H-R-I-S-T. And the grist would, they would spin it, and then it would create the motor, and then you would use the motor to grind up the corn, and that is how they was creating the cornmeal and trading with the Native Americans, who used to be called the Indians, who were Indian and feminized by the East Indian Company, right? Well, ultimately, even before that, I mean, this has been going on forever with the lies and the bull, trying to make it the feminized society, and then the masculine, the feminine eliminating the masculine, always, always, always trying, and then at times when you need a society to grow it, you bring it into the masculine way, right? And like in America, in the beginning, when it was growing it, we bring you forth the masculine way, right? And that is the true way, right? And then once you want everything to go backwards, you turn it to the feminine way, and it tear it down, right? You think about Hawaii, right? The nation of Hawaii, right? This was the rule, that there was always Hawaiian king, right? But then all of a sudden they have the thing where the men and the women would always eat the separate. This way the men could talk the truth, right? But then one day they change it, where the Hawaiian queen come and then eating with the men, and then all of a sudden they have a queen to rule it, right? And once the queen rule it, Hawaii is descending into ownership to the English, because the queen is making the bad decision, and they're doing the thing with the Jew, and after a while it just degrades into the homosex, right? Because that is what the feminine do, is they feel, you've got me feeling emotions deeper than I ever be loved, whoa, whoa. And the men is like, I don't care about the emotions, I really only care about keeping it really 100 about the truth, right? And this is the beauty of being a man, right? Is when you're a man, you have a God-given ability to not have all the extra water and go with how we feel, right? Because we don't have the two big sackies and the big booties. Generally, we have less of the water, and therefore we don't have, the menstrual cycle that throws us off once a month to go into the temper tantrum and the mood swing and to mess with the ovary and make me craving the dick at a certain time, right? We just have it designed to be the leader, because we have less of the things that cause the emotions to go this way and that way. So it's very important that we now serving the people who are the men, we give them only the feminine meat, right? With the men, we give them only the feminine meat, right? That's why we don't eat the boar, but we eat the pig. We don't eat the rooster, no, we eat the chicken, right? This is why we don't eat the bull, but we do eat the cow, right? You see it? They want everybody eating the woman. Eat the woman, eat the woman, eat the woman, eat the estrogen, eat the hormone of the woman. Because why? They're trying to tear it down. What? The society. Why? So they can rebuild it back up again. We build, baby, you build me a buttercup just to break it down, and mess me around, and then worst of all, we go to the festival where you say you will, and I love you still. I did poo more than anyone, darling. I think that we're falling evolve. So build me a buttercup. Don't break my fart. Doom doo doo.